the flood sequence, but I wanted to give it just a little bit of background. We're on page 27, which I think will cast a little light on the direct description of the story, which starts on Parshas Noach. Yesterday we talked about the trios of sentences that describe the various generations, how long they lived, and had sons and daughters. Now, this is chapter 6, verse 28. Lamech. I don't know why they do that.
Verse
28 on page 27.
Unless it's chapter 5 still.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, chapter 5. Yeah, yes, I misread the chapter, thank you. Yeah, I don't know why in the English they changed the vowels. I can't understand that. In the Hebrew it's lemech.
It's a mistake.
But it's not the only one that they do, and they do it consistently. I can't understand it. Anyway, Lamech lived 182 years and begot a son. And he called his name Noach. So this is not the pattern that we have for all the other trios. All the other trios are, he lived so many years, and he begot so-and-so. Here it says he begot a son, and he called his name. He called the name Noach, saying, this one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which Hashem had cursed. That's quite a remarkable statement. If he said it upon birth, then it's like prophecy. Somehow, this one, after all, Hashem cursed the land. Many generations have gone by. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you. So the oral tradition tells us that curse that God put on the land as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge, that curse stopped in Noah's time. It stopped. And as we pointed out, a curse is not a mitzvah, it's not a desideratum, and it's not an inescapable reality. And here's a case where part of the curse actually stopped. So if Lamech somehow knew this and was giving him the name because he knew that the birth of this child is going to have an effect on the nature of the world, so then we can understand what he's saying. And the word Noach in Hebrew refers to resting. Now, just to avoid misunderstanding in other circumstances, when you hear the word rest, you think relaxing in the hammock with a mint julep in one hand and listening to Beethoven. Yeah, Beethoven. And staring at the clouds in the sky. But that's not what rest means. Not even what it really means in English. He hit the ball with the 5-iron, and it landed in the green and came to rest 3 inches from the cup. That's perfectly good English, right? The ball came to rest 3 inches from the cup. It doesn't mean repairing aching muscles and regaining strength for the next day and so on. It just means stopped moving. Rest is the opposite of motion. So now, if you are getting 1 acre of wheat per unit of land, and now the fertility of the land dramatically increases, and you're now getting 10 units of wheat per unit of land, so then you'll do less effort. There'll be less need for investing effort. And that's the idea of getting rest from the work of our hands. The work of our hands will be much more productive now, and therefore we won't have to put in so much effort. So that's one thing about Noach. And then, verse 32 says, when Noach was 500 years old, Noach begot Shem, Ham, and Yefes, his 3 sons. And in terms of the chronologies which you saw before, this is very dramatic. The oldest that we have on record, I think here is Lemech, 182, before the designated successor. Here's 500. And then there are 3 designated successors, the 3 sons that he had. So this is certainly out of the pattern of the previous generations. That's background. That's background information which the text is giving you. Now, let's take a look. Well, okay, take a look on page 29, just one more piece of background information. Top of the page. Hashem said, I will blot out man whom I created from the face of the ground, from man to animal, creeping things, birds of the sky. For I have now, this English is beautifully ambiguous. Reconsidered my having made them. Some bad translations write that I regret having made them. That's not correct. Theologically, it's inconceivable that God would regret something that he had done. What, made a mistake, miscalculated, gave in to his desires? It's not part of our picture of God. And as the commentators point out, comparing it with verses in Isaiah and other places, what it means is this. I have a project, and I choose means by which the project could be pushed forward. After a certain period of time, circumstances change, and I now change the means that I'm going to use to push it forward. Doesn't mean I regret what I did before. What I did before served its purpose in its time, and now it's time for a change. So reconsidered my having made them, you could read it either way. You could read it as regret. Was it a good thing that I did? Maybe it was a mistake, and so forth and so on. Or you could say, I made them. Now I'm reconsidering what to do from now on. And maybe I should, from now on, a different means would be more appropriate. And that is the correct way to read it. So, it's recording a resolve of Hashem to change the conditions. And then it says, and then the English translation does a lot. It puts in but where the Hebrew is just and, meaning the English understands this as a qualification of what came from before. But literally speaking, it just says and. Noach found grace in the eyes of Hashem. So, there's a reconsideration, a plan of a new strategy, but one thing in the old strategy is going to be continued, and that's Noach. And in the Hebrew, you have a beautiful play on the word here, because the word for grace in Hebrew is chen. It's just the letters of Noach backwards. So it means it's built into, there's a certain grace, a certain beauty, a certain appropriateness that's built into Noach. Since Noach's arrival in the world canceled the curse, part of the curse on the ground that God gave to the ground so as to punish man, that already, what's the effect? It's like waving a magic wand and making the world much better. What do you think of a person who does that? Wow. Look what effect he has. Look what kind of person he is. And now it's even in terms of this change of pattern or change of strategy, but he, coming from the old world, is going to be part of the new strategy. So that already sets him apart and puts him in a very special position. This is all background for the beginning on the next page. Yeah.
Maybe we'll discuss in the next one, but what about the fish? Because it says man, animal, the creeping things, and the birds from the sky. Does that have a fit? The fish aren't going to die from a flood.
Correct. And they didn't.
Okay.
In fact, it says everything that has the breath of life in its nostrils. And that definitely does include fish. My problem is with insects, because insects don't respirate through nostrils. They don't have lungs. They absorb oxygen through their skin. So I never understood how that exactly fits into the description. But fish are not a problem. They didn't die.
And how do you understand ki nichamti, ki asisim?
So nichamti, that's exactly what I'm commenting on. Meaning of nichamti.
But how do you understand ki asisim, according to what you're saying?
I made them, and now I'm changing my strategy, and I'm going to go on in a different way. In other words, they're mine. I put them here in the first place. and now I'm replacing that with something else. You see, when Shmuel, the prophet, says to Shaul the king, God's finished with you. You didn't destroy Amalek the way you should have. I was finished with you. And it says, Nicham. He's Nicham that he made you king. And then a little bit later, he says somebody else is going to be king in place of you. And don't think you could change it, because God is not a man that he should be Nicham in what he does. So, wait a second. 5 sentences ago, he said he was Nicham in making you a king. And now he says he's not Nicham? So the answer is that when it's a matter of a means to an end, there can be a change in the new circumstances to use a different means to an end. When we talk about the end, something that's intrinsic as a goal, that doesn't get changed. The Nicham only applies to changing a means to an end. And Dovid HaMelech, establishing Dovid HaMelech as king, and the line from Yehuda being king, that's a goal. That's not something which is a means to something else. And therefore, he said it's not going to apply over there. It's within several verses, you can see it right away, that the word Nicham has a more subtle meaning than, I wish I hadn't done it.
But wouldn't you want to say Nicham be that they sinned, not that I made them, that they sinned? Now I reconsider, my future plan. But it's not that I made them. I'm not reconsidering because I made them.
Well, you can only reconsider something which you have done. You could change the circumstances because you think from now on it'll be better, but it wouldn't be reconsidering. You'd just be introducing your power into an already going situation. But here he made them, and now he's choosing another way to go forward. That's why I think it's written that way. Okay. Now there's a lot of microscopic work to do here in Noach, and it'll pay off in some very important general principles. Let's start with their translation. We'll question it in a moment. This is page 31. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Okay, we'll question these things also. Noach walked with God. Noach had begotten 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. So the first thing you notice, which your helpful friendly translator prods you to pay attention to by putting in his dashes, the first thing you notice is what? These are his offspring. Where are his offspring mentioned? After all of the personal qualifications. If it says these are the offspring, shouldn't it have said right away, Shem, Ham, and Yafes? What's the intervening material? So your translator thought, clearly this is like an interpolation, Maybe I should have used parentheses, like sort of background stuff that's stuck in the middle. But really, the idea of offspring goes on the next verse. That's what the translator was indicating to you. But Rashi has a different shot, a shot that works extremely well in the words, because you take a look, page 11, verse 4 starts, these are the products of heaven and earth. And if you look at the Hebrew, in verse Dalet, it's exactly the same words as we have. Ela, Toldos, Hashemayim V'aretz. And here it's Ela, Toldos, Noach. So Noach doesn't have to mean biological descendants. Toldos can mean productions, things that you produce. And so Rashi suggests that on page 31, a better translation would be, these are the productions of Noach. Well, a person through his lifetime produces lots of things. In our perspective, one of the things he produces is his own character. You create your own characteristics, your psychology, your motivations by the actions that you do. That's one of your responsibilities. It's one of the 613 commandments to build good character. So, what he produced in the world was being a righteous man, being whole in his generation should modify both righteous and whole, and walking with God. That is, he produced those things. And also, he produced his sons, Shem, Ham, and Yasser. There's also things that he produced, from which the rabbinic sources conclude the character that you build for yourself is more important as one of your productions than the physical children that you give birth to. Now, I think what I told you 7 minutes and 42 seconds ago supports this very strongly, because 2 pages ago, we already know who his children are. He's been introduced, and his children have been listed. So, if you're going to start over again, why would you start over again with a list of his children? You know that already. But if you understand that this is a question of his offspring, of his productions, then it's fine. Yes, he produced his own actions, his own righteousness, his own character, and so forth and so on. And he also produced his children. They are also productions of his. You don't want to leave them out. You don't want to list them as part of his productions. But you're not informing me as to who his children are. If you thought, like the dashes indicate here, that really it would have been better to write, these are the offspring of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Yafes, that would be redundant against what was written 2 pages ago. But the way it's written this way, where Rashi explains, it's not redundant at all. Because we're talking now about the productions that a person has and where the position that his physical descendants have in his productions. Okay? Now, everything I have said so far leaves out one word, which given everything I've said so far, you can erase the word and have all the content that I just said. Which word in verse 9, verse 9, could you erase and have all the content that I have told you so far?
Righteous man?
You wouldn't know he was righteous.
Well, I mean, he's perfect in his generations.
Well, he's righteous in his generations, and perfect I translated as whole because that's what the word is. Tamim really means whole or pure. It doesn't mean perfect. I don't think Hebrew has a word for perfect. Medieval Hebrew does, but I don't think Tanakh Hebrew word does. Which I just erase it, and you would, given everything I've told you, you wouldn't lose anything. I mean, that's what the verse is telling you. How about the fact that it repeats his name? You didn't notice it, okay. And in English, you would never do that. You would say, these are the products of Noah. He did A, B, C, D. You'd use a pronoun. You'd repeat his name. Okay. Given that there's a problem with repeating the name, and given what I told you before, what must you conclude? These are the productions of Noah. What's number 1? Himself. He's self-produced. Not just aspects, but in a certain sense, his identity is self-produced. It's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates each person with a big gaping hole, an empty hole, and he says, you fill it. This is self-creativity. It's a very, very strong statement. Once you take Toldos to mean productions, the repetition of the name means Noah produced Noah. And in very great measure, that's the Jewish understanding. So that becomes a very strong statement.
Does it go with the concept of really the only thing a human can create is free will, like decisions between good and evil? Like you really can't create anything. Everything is really
No,
there already.
it's not really that idea. It's talking about the consequences of free will. And insofar as you attribute what happens in the world to the free will of a human being, and that's an ingredient in making it happen. Had he not had the free will, but often and almost always it would have worked out differently. So that ingredient then plays a role in physical happenings also. But the important spiritual and psychological point here is, and I'll just mention this now for a little bit because in modern philosophy it's sort of almost lost lost attention, and that is an action, a decision and an action a person performs has two different dimensions of consequences. One is externally, how does the world change? And the other is, how does the agent himself change as a result of the fact that he did that? In ethics, you have responsibility, and you have good and evil, and you have justice, and you have obligations, and so on and so on. There used to be something called virtue ethics on becoming a good person, which is different from performing good actions, because a person can perform good actions for bad motivation, and that way he doesn't become a good person. Pays his taxes because he doesn't want to go to jail. Paying his taxes is good. That's the right thing to do. But he's not a good person if the only reason he pays is to avoid going to jail. The idea is what is virtue, and how do you become a virtuous person? Aristotle wrote about that in great length. Plato wrote about it indirectly, right? And it's sort of been lost sight of. Here, what we're being told is your inner character and your inner identity is also in your hands. Right? This is not just not the idea that I'm only responsible for my will. My will makes me responsible, at least in large part, for the things that happen, even if you have the picture, which I think is an accurate picture, that the physical effects of my will are all a divine power. Everything's a partnership. I will, and then God makes it happen. But since I know that what he makes happen is almost always, 99.99999% of the time, what happens is what I willed, then I know with almost perfect certainty that had I willed differently, something else would have happened. And therefore, my choice is an ingredient in what happens, and I can predict that, and that's why I'm responsible for the outcome as well. I don't have to control it. It doesn't have to be my power that does it. It's enough that I know that my choice has these consequences. You have a question? You have a question? Yeah.
Does that mean when it says that we're saying that he produced himself, is that like was there a build up to this, that he produced himself, or he was like born and then he just made himself into who he is?
I don't know what the contrast is between the two things. He didn't start when he was 6 months old. He didn't start when he was 6 months old, right? He had to go through childhood like the rest of us.
Is it saying though at this point in the parsha, like this is when he produced himself?
It means it has happened. Was it from 150 years to 307 years that it happened? Did it happen gradually throughout the whole time? I have no clue. But by this time, that's what you could say.
He was like Abraham in the sense he didn't have a mentor that he built his character on.
That's not clear because I think he knew. Let's see now. There's a wonderful chart here of the lifetimes where you see how they overlapped, and yeah. So I think between Adam and Abraham, there are only two other generations. Linking them is tremendous overlap. So he had contact with great people. There's no how much contact he had, how much he learned, and so on. I don't know. I haven't explored that literature to say. So I don't know how much of it was his own and how much it was the contact with other people.
Have those people fallen? The ones from the great people from the...
No, I mean Shem. Well, I'm talking about Shem now. I'm thinking of the children of after Noah. Maybe it's the end of. No, it's not. The end of Noah. That's where the chart is.
I think the timeline about 53.
Where 53? Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so here you have when they died. Okay, so Adam dies here, and Noah.
I guess it was like 126 years between them.
There's 20-year gap.
It was
Yeah,
126.
so that means that, for example, Chase, he probably knew Chase. Let's see, does he know Chase? Chase is very special.
No, it says he literally just Enoch.
It's a very, right, Chanoch, he knew, yeah, because he died, right, well, he died very, very quick. Oh, no, this is only when Noah died. These are only the times, one second.
Born and died.
Oh,
No, I see. This is the birth and death, right? It is. So
And he missed.
Yered, he overlapped with Yered. He overlapped with Meshusalach. Meshusalach was a great person. He overlapped with him. Well, Shem is his son. That's going the other way. He definitely overlapped with his son. Yeah. Anyway, so now let's take another look at this first verse here, because there's another thing to comment on. So it says, and the comma in the translation I don't think is correct. Noach was righteous and whole in his generations. So now, the objection is raised. Suppose someone asks me, how tall is Reuven? And I say, Reuven is 6'2" in his class. I think you'd wonder why I mentioned in his class. I mean, either he is or he isn't. 6'2" is a quality of the person in and of himself. Here you have righteous. I mean, either you do the right thing or you don't do the right thing. You have complete or whole or pure. Either you are or you aren't. What does it mean in his generations? And there are two explanations here. One explanation is, really, strictly speaking, you think of righteous and whole and complete and pure as absolute terms? Yeah, they very often are. That's true. Not here. Here it only means in comparison to the people in his generations, he was more righteous than they were. More complete, more whole, more pure than they were. But in absolute terms, he wasn't. And had he lived in the generation of Abraham, he wouldn't have been accounted for much. That's one way of interpreting in his generations. But there's another way. And that is, yes, they're absolute terms. He was righteous and whole and pure and complete. In spite of living in those generations that are deteriorating to the flood, and most people are affected by their surroundings, he was able to achieve that kind of spiritual excellence in spite of those generations. But both of them make good sense out of why it says in his generations. But notice they make opposite sense. One detracts from achievement. The first explanation detracts from achievement, and the second explanation magnifies his achievement. And now the subtle question, textual question, will become, given the context, are they really equally available, equally appropriate? Are we reading about how great Noah is? Isn't that the context here? Isn't this a lead up to the fact that when the whole world gets destroyed, he's going to be saved? Why would anyone think of the detracting interpretation when you have the other interpretation available? This is Machlokes Rab and Shmuel in the Gemara, and they knew each other. They were aware of each one of the other interpretation. Why would you choose to interpret in his generations in a way to lower what he did when the whole context is praising him, and you have available an interpretation which increases what he did? Why would you choose that? This is it's a kind of question that one ought to ask in trying to understand a text. And the answer I already hinted at yesterday, and that is, if we look very carefully at the description of Noach in this passage, we'll see that it isn't simply positive. It isn't completely and simply positive. It's nuanced. It's not so clear as to, it's not all positive. There are positive and negative elements which leave room for one or the other interpretation. Yesterday we talked about walked with God. And we mentioned that it is not where this is introduced. Hanoch also walked with God. What was the result of Hanoch's walking with God? He died around 600 years early. Wow, that's not a bad, that's not a trivial loss, right? Why did he die? And it says two things. It says, for 300 years he walked with God, had sons and daughters. And then it says, he walked with God and he was no more, for God had taken him. So it sounds like walking with God plays two roles. It's mentioned twice in the space of two lines. The text doesn't anticipate that you forgot it in the meantime. The first one is, here's how he walked with God and had sons and daughters. And the second one is, because he walked with God, God took him and he was no more. Well, how did we explain that yesterday? He walked with God because he was rightfully afraid of the influence of the disintegrating culture around him. And so he did his best to isolate himself, to cut himself off. But he was afraid that he would be overwhelmed, that he would not be successful. So cutting himself off and trying to preserve himself was an expression of genuine spirituality, but weakness also, a weak spirituality. And therefore, Hashem took him early so as to protect him from being overwhelmed by the environment. So when it says here that Noah walked with God, we have to hear both sides. Not bad, it's not trivial, it's definitely a degree of success, but there's a weakness built in. And I'd mentioned to you that when God changes Abraham's name, he says to me, walk before me and be perfect, whole, complete, pure. The same word that's used for Noah, the very same word that's used for Noah, but there it says walk before me. It doesn't say walk with me. And the difference is that here the text describes the fact, and in the text with Abraham, Hashem's on record as to what he wants. He's commanding him what he wants him to do. So the Midrash says it's like a father going through the forest with two sons, an older son and a younger son, and the younger son holds his father's hand. As long as he's holding his father's hand, he's confident, he's not afraid, he's comfortable. The older son, the father says, climb that hill, climb up on that tree, look off into the distance and come back and tell me what you see. And he can do that because he's stronger and he's independent. Doesn't have to be holding his father's hand the whole time. That's the difference between Abraham and Noah. So the ideal is to be like Abraham, which from the rest of the text is obvious from the way in which the text treats the two of them. So Noah, again, is not being condemned. It's just that the description is an equivocal description with some positive elements and some negative elements. That's one reason why you might think that in his generations could be said in a way that lowers his achievement. That's one such element. Are we together so far? There are more of them. Take a look on the next page. The intervening material, but I'm focusing on this particular aspect now. Top of the page, verse 18. I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Then, chapter 7, verse 1. Hashem said to Noah, come to the ark, you and all your household, for it is you that I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. Therefore, I'm saving you. Now look at verse 7, bottom of the page. Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Did anything jar your sensitivity here? Your sensibility?
Why do you have to wait for the water to come?
I mean, God gave him a command to go into the ark, didn't he? Why doesn't it say, and he did what God told him to do? That's said in the 1,000 pages of Tanakh at least 100 times, maybe 500 times. So God tells someone to do something, and it says, Vayas came, and he did so. Or it'll say, and he did as God commanded him, and it'll say, and repeat the command. Here, it gives an entirely different explanation. Well, the water's up to the doorpost. I guess it's time to go in. That's very jarring. Again, indicates that not everything is perfect in the case of Noah. And finally, you take a look on page 41. 43. After the flood is over and he comes out of the ark, it says, verse 20 at the bottom of the page, Noach, the man of the earth, debased himself and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and became uncovered within his tent. Wow, this great person, righteous, whole, pure, complete, walking with God, ends up drunk? So I think, at least when you take the details together, the picture you get of Noach isn't a simple picture. It's not a one-dimensional picture. There are definitely strengths and there are definitely weaknesses. So when we come back and say, in his generations, you have the two interpretations. The one who interprets it as downplaying his achievement has what to lean on. Because in the context, there definitely is reason to downplay what he achieved. Yeah.
You translated it as became uncovered. It says and he uncovered himself.
I know. I think that there's a grammatical problem here. In Hebrew, there is a conjugation called the hispa'el. The hispa'el often is used as a reflexive, doing something to yourself. But sometimes the hispa'el is used as a pure nif'al, which means a passive voice. It happened to him. And here, the fact that it's written in hispa'el, I don't think settles it. Rashi quotes the Targum, which also has the hispa'el, but in Aramaic also it's ambiguous. So I'm not convinced.
It would sound weird to say he uncovered himself.
Either that or it creates a false connotation. When you hear the words he uncovered himself, it means he's stripped. But he could be so drunk that he doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, he's drunk. So, and then it's not as if he chose to become, just, flailing around and the clothes came off. They didn't have buttons in those days. So, it was like a piece of cloth over there with a tie and just flailing around, it came off. That called he uncovered himself. So I don't know. I'm not convinced that the nuances of that are correct. At any rate, I think this now gives us room to understand why there would be two interpretations. Of course, you see what I'm doing. You have to make sense out of a verse. When we started out with the second Rashi in Chumash, where I said he expressed his methodology, you need to pay attention to the meaning of the words, the logic of the words, the realism of the portrayal of the events that take place. You also need to take into account the context. And maybe there are other things that I'm not thinking of at the moment. There's a lot to take into account when you're trying to understand what the verse is teaching. Okay, now 11 says the earth had become corrupt before God. The earth had become filled with robbery. Those who know Hebrew, the word in Hebrew is chamas, but here it means robbery. Rabbinic Hebrew, it means something else, but here it means, all the commentators agree that it means robbery. God said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with robbery through them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them from the earth. Make for yourselves an ark of gopher wood. Make the ark with compartments. Cover it inside and outside with pitch. This is how you shall make it. 300 cubits, the length of the ark. Now, a cubit is about 20 inches or so. So 300 cubits is really long. It's not 450 feet. Even Donald Trump would be happy to have a boat that's 450 feet long. 50 cubits width, 30 cubits height. Make a boat. And then inside it should have 3 levels and so on and so on. Here is a question, I would think it was a theological question. What does he need a boat for? Well, there's a flood coming, Rabbi. It's obvious. How are you going to survive without a flood, without a boat? Really? There's a flood coming? You mean they had meteorologists who were telling him that in 120 years it's going to be rain? Isn't the flood a miracle? Yeah, it's a miracle. The Torah makes clear that it's a miracle. So what does he need a boat to protect himself for? Just as God makes the flood and drowns everything else, God can cause him not to be drowned. What's the purpose of the boat? And this, Rashi says, I think he's quoting Chazal, if I'm not mistaken. That's a midrash. He says the following. Now I want you to listen to what I say and see if you can figure out the implications of what's being said. God told him to make a boat so that people will ask him what he's doing. After all, this took up to 120 years. And it's a gigantic project, especially with their resources. He said, what are you doing? Year after year. More lumber, more pitch, more ceilings. And he will say to them, a flood is coming, and it's coming because of your behavior. Maybe if he tells them that, then they'll change, and the flood could be avoided. That's why God told him to build a boat. What does that imply about Noah? Yeah?
I was just thinking that if I see someone building a boat for 100 years, I would probably think they're crazy more than, that it's like, there's going to be flood because I'm being a bad person.
You might.
Yeah.
You might. Right? I mean, different people react in different ways and so on and so on. Listen to it again. God told him to build a boat so that people will come and ask him what he's doing, so that he'll tell them that a flood is coming, and it's because of their actions, so that maybe they'll change.
So that he wasn't doing it on his own.
Right. It means left to his own devices, without a boat, God tells him the end is coming, and Noah's attitude is, it's your world. I agree. I'm not have no protest, no objections. Do with your world as you please. He wouldn't have reached out to the people around him at all. So God had to force him, trigger this to happen to him. That's also a very detracting picture. The Zohar has a very bitter condemnation of Noah. The Zohar says that after it was over, and he comes out to the destroyed world, Noah starts reciting the 13 attributes of mercy. And God says to him, where were you when I needed you? Why weren't you like Moses? When I told Moses, as Moses is going to be, why aren't you, when I tell Moses that I'm going to destroy the Jewish people, he has all sorts of objections against what I'm doing. He pleads for them. He tries to protect them. Why did I tell you? I could have waited till the last minute and then saved you on my own. I told you because I wanted you to do something about it. In particular, you should have prayed to me to stop it. And you didn't. And the Zohar indicates that that's at least one of the reasons why he became a drunk. Because he was confronted with this gigantic failure. He didn't do anything to try to save it, try to save the situation. When God tells somebody something, sometimes the purpose of telling him is to provoke a reaction. When God tells Abraham that I might destroy the city of Sodom, the purpose of it is to provoke a reaction. When God tells Moses that he's going to destroy the Jewish people, God uses the words, Heref mimeni v'ashmideim. Release me and I'll destroy them. So the Midrash records Moses' reaction. Release you? Was I holding on to you? Wait a minute. Release you? That means maybe I could stop it because you're asking me for release. So no, I'm not going to release you. I'm going to argue against it and tell you that you shouldn't do it. That's what God wants. He's provoking that kind of reaction. And Noah failed. So it's another example of the weakness of Noah, the failure of Noah. So there's a lot going on here. Okay, now, we still have, it's 5 to, good. Let's go back to page 33, where we were a moment ago. Let's reread what we read before with a little more attention to a detail. Verse 18, top of the page. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Does that bother you a little bit? Anything about the verse bother you a little bit? How about the order? you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives. You wouldn't write that. No one would write. Even the New York Times wouldn't write that. Right? They would write the women first. They're so corrupt. You and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives. That's what you should write. Why is it written this way? And look at the bottom of the page, verse 7. It repeats it. Noach, with his sons, his wife and his sons' wives with him, went into the ark. So I hear them in the background, yeah, men first, women second, misogynists all, women are always second class, but go to the back of the bus. Okay, we've heard that song and dance. But then, take a look at page 39. Verse 15, God spoke to Noach saying, go forth from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons and your sons' wives with you. Aha. Now it's the expected order. Don't tell me about women to the back of the bus. What's the difference? And to make it even more challenging and more confusing, take a look at verse 18. So Noach went forth, and his sons, his wife and his son's wife. That's the old order from 3 pages ago. What's going on here? And the answer is not difficult. It's not far to understand. Hashem said to Noach, when you go into the ark, don't engage in procreation. The whole world is being destroyed. That's not a time to engage in procreation. So he told them to go in, men and women separate, and they went in, men and women separate. Now on page 39, when they're going out of the ark, he tells them, go out, men and women together. And indeed, look at it again. Verse 16, go forth from the ark, you and your wife, sons and wives with you. If you have any doubt as to what that was supposed to mean, look at verse 17. Every living being that is with you, of all flesh, birds, animals, moving things that move in the earth, order them out with you, and let them teem on the earth, be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Now has come time to replenish the earth. Then that makes verse 18 striking. They don't do it. They come out separate. And that change in the order motivates the next 3 pages of text. It's all based on this particular idea, that God has announced to them that it's time to replenish the earth, and they refuse to undertake it. Let me show you. I won't have time to do all the nuances, but let me show you how this works in the subsequent text. I'm not now doing the microscopic thing. I'm looking now more globally at the progress of events. Go down to verse 20 at the bottom of page 39. Noah built an altar to Hashem, took every clean animal, every clean bird, offered burnt offerings on the altar. Hashem smelled the pleasing aroma, whatever that means, and Hashem said in his heart. Hashem said in his heart. That means this is a meditation, but not spoken out, not communicated. I will not continue to curse the ground because of man, since the imagery of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again continue to smite every living thing, living beings I have done, continuously all the days of the earth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer, winter, day and night, shall not cease, no more general destruction. That's what God resolves in his heart. But he doesn't tell it to them. Okay, chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the land. Okay, I gave you a hint, a pretty strong hint, but you didn't take it. So now I'm giving you a blessing to be fruitful and multiply and fill the land. Then there's intervening material. Look at verse 7, the bottom 41. And you, be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply on it. So verse 1 is a blessing, and verse 7 is a command. Yeah, okay. Now they're a blessing and a command. Do they do it? So now let me teach you a little piece of textual interpretation. Verse 1 is, God blessed Noah and he said to them. verse 8 is, and God said to Noah and his sons. Why is there a new introduction? Why isn't it just continue on telling what he said? Why does it repeat? When you have, in this text, probably in other texts as well, but in this text, when it says, and they said, PQR, and they said XYZ, you repeat, and they said, to say that there's a gap. There's a speech, and there's a gap, and there's a new speech. That's why it repeats, and they said. So, after the blessing and the command, there's a gap. Let's see what happens. And the answer is, nothing happens. Okay, what happens now? God said to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you, with all your offspring after you. Every living being is with you, birds, animals, all the beasts of the land. For all of you is part of the ark. I will confirm my covenant. Never again shall flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall be a flood to destroy the earth. Now he tells them what he resolved in his mind. So this must have something to do with why they're refusing. So this is now the second attempt to trigger a response on their part. 12 starts with, and God said, which means another separate speech, which means that it's another gap. What happens in the gap? Nothing happens in the gap, and that's the problem. Now he's explained to them, you're afraid that your descendants are going to end up like Adam's descendants. You're afraid that you're certainly not superior to Adam. Why should you think the world will have any better future? I'm telling you, that's not a risk. It's not a risk. And they still don't do it. Okay. Stage 3. God said, this is the sign of the covenant I'll give between me and you and every living being that is with you, the rainbow. I set the rainbow in the cloud, etc. When there are clouds, I'll see the rainbow and remember my covenant not to bring a flood on the earth. That's the third speech. Well, verse 17 starts again, and God said to Noah, so that's the fourth speech. What happens between the third speech and the fourth speech? Nothing happens. Nothing. He's made a promise. He's given a sign of the promise. Nothing happens. Okay. 17. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I've confirmed between me and all flesh upon the earth. And the commentators say here, he showed him a rainbow, and I'll prove to you why that's correct. He showed it to him. Aha. That's the fourth speech. What happens now? Well, let's just keep reading. The sons of Noah who came out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Ham the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world was spread out. Now they finally get to it. That's what I meant when I said the whole text is addressing what we saw in the change of order, that when God told them to go out, they should go out men and women together, and they came out separately. All the intervening text was to get to here, where finally they get together. If you miss the shift in the order of the verses of sons and wives, you miss the whole point of the story. It's unbelievable. You miss the whole point of the story. A whole thing can be tied in such a tiny, tiny little detail. Okay, now I just want to show you one thing, and then I'm going to quit for today, and we'll go back through this next week, Mr. Hashem. I told you in 17, commentators say, this is the sign of the covenant. And the natural understanding is the word this in English and zeh in Hebrew is a demonstrative. You can only say this about something that's present, something that you can indicate, you can point to. In English, very interesting. You can say that without that being the case. Oh, you mean that book? I left at home. I can't say, oh, you mean this book? I left at home? You can't say that. Because if you say this, it's got to be with you on the table. It can't be at home. Okay? So, the word zeh indicates there's something present. That's why in verse 17, it says, he showed it to them and they could see it. But then the critic, the helpful, friendly critic says, well, Rabbi, back in verse 12, it says, this is the sign of the covenant. It's the same words as 17. This is the sign of the covenant. Why would you think that in 17, this is the sign of the covenant refers to the thing in the sky which he showed them, and verse 12, it doesn't. They're the same words. Not a bad question. Not a stupid question. And the answer is that the word this can be used to indicate something present in a number of different ways. Suppose someone sends an email to somebody else and says, I know you were asking for the recipe for chocolate chip cookies. This is the recipe. What does the word this refer to? The following message in the thing, right? Take 2 parts of flour, and take some sugar, and take some water, and blend it, right? It's the next words in the paragraph. The this refers to the next words in the paragraph. And it's there on the paragraph, on the page with you. That's what the this in 12 refers to. This is the sign of the covenant. What is it? I've set my rainbow in the cloud. I'm explaining to you what the covenant is. Once you have a this with an explanation of what it is, to say this again now requires understanding. What this is left over? The answer is he showed it to them. And the deep point here, which again I will elaborate on Sunday, Mr. Hashem, the deep point here is notice all of the attempts that didn't work, and notice what did work. A promise, a sign, an indication you should get together, a blessing you should get together, a command you should get together, a promise of no flood, a promise of a sign of no flood, all of that didn't do it. Seeing the rainbow did it. Now, I hope you'll agree with me that if Noah had doubts, I know he promised, but maybe there are hidden conditions. Maybe if I'm too bad or my descendants are too bad, it won't work. I don't know if I can trust it, you can't feel confident of it. Seeing colors in the sky isn't going to change that. Oh, boy, that's very beautiful. I'm sure it'll work now. Seeing colors is not relevant to that. It's not relevant. Seeing colors in the sky gives them an experience. And experiences change people. Experiences move people, even great people. And that's one of the lessons here. And this lesson is repeated over and over again in the Torah. When God promises Abraham children, he first takes them out at night, and he says, look at the stars and count them if you can count them. So will be your children. Now let's see. He's promising Abraham children. If Abraham has doubts about the promise, maybe I'll fail, maybe conditions will change, who knows? Will seeing and counting the stars give him more evidence, more reason, more credibility? Why would that be? But no, seeing the stars when you hear the message has an effect on you, which isn't more evidence and reason and credibility. It has an effect on your emotions. The same thing happens to Moses at the burning bush. So you're talking about very great people where experience was used to cement their confidence, to cement their commitment, even when intellectually they had no doubts and they were the greatest of people. And this is an indication of the centrality of experience in a Jewish life, that it's considered to be a necessary ingredient. It's not something that can be overlooked. So I said this is an introduction to the subject. We'll talk about it on Sunday in more detail.